The Zephyrian Imperial Palace stretched across 17 floating platforms, each one the size of a small city. Crystal spires reached toward the triple suns, their surfaces gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the planet's magnetic field. Dragons soared between the platforms, their massive wings casting shadows over the bustling courtyards below. This was the heart of the most powerful empire in the known galaxy, home to beings who could reshape matter with their thoughts and bend space-time to their will. Marcus Chen pushed his maintenance cart through the marble corridors of Platform 7, the residential wing reserved for the Imperial family. His brown coveralls marked him as what he was, human maintenance staff, barely worth a glance from the Zephyrian nobles who glided past in their flowing robes. At 28, Marcus had been working in the palace for 3 years, ever since the Terran Republic had negotiated the service contract that allowed humans to work in non-critical positions throughout Zephyrian space. The job paid well, better than anything he could have found back on Earth's overcrowded colonies. But it came with a price. Humans were seen as useful but inferior, capable of basic tasks but lacking the advanced mental capabilities that made the Zephyrians the dominant species in this sector of the galaxy. Marcus had learned to keep his head down, do his work, and ignore the casual dismissal in their large, serpentine eyes. Today's assignment was routine, cleaning the meditation chambers on the upper levels. Marcus had done this section dozens of times before. The Zephyrians were meticulous about cleanliness, particularly in spaces used for their mental exercises. Their telepathic abilities required perfect environmental conditions, free from any contamination that might disrupt their concentration. As he worked his way through the chambers, Marcus noticed something unusual. A soft, rhythmic sound was coming from one of the supposedly empty rooms. He paused, listening carefully. It sounded like labored breathing, interspersed with small whimpers of pain. Marcus knew he should report it through proper channels and move on. Humans weren't supposed to investigate anything beyond their assigned duties. But something about the sound tugged at him. It reminded him of his younger sister when she'd been sick as a child, struggling with pneumonia in their cramped apartment on Luna Station. He approached the door carefully and pressed his ear against the smooth metal surface. The breathing was definitely coming from inside, shallow and irregular. Against his better judgment, Marcus activated the maintenance override on his tool belt. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, curled up behind an ornate meditation altar, was a small Zephyrian child. The young dragon was perhaps equivalent to a 10-year-old human, though Marcus knew their development didn't map directly. The child's normally iridescent scales had dulled to a sickly gray, and his breathing was labored and uneven. Marcus stepped into the room cautiously. "Hey there," he said softly, the way he used to speak to frightened animals back on Earth. "Are you okay?" The child's head lifted slightly, revealing large golden eyes clouded with pain and confusion. When he spoke, his voice was a whisper, but Marcus could hear the universal translation system in his earpiece converting the words. "Hurts," the child managed. "Everything hurts." Marcus knelt down, keeping his distance but trying to appear non-threatening. "What's your name?" "Kiros," the child replied. "Prince Kiros." Marcus felt his stomach drop. A prince. Of all the Zephyrian children he could have stumbled across, it had to be imperial royalty. He should call for help immediately, get the medical staff, alert the guards. But something in the child's eyes stopped him. There was not just pain there, but also a deep loneliness, as if he'd been suffering alone for a long time. "When did you start feeling sick, Kiros?" Marcus asked. The prince struggled to lift his head higher. "Many rotations ago. But the healers say nothing is wrong. Father says I am weak, that I need to concentrate harder on my lessons." Marcus felt a familiar anger rise in his chest. He'd seen this before, back on Earth, Adults so caught up in their own problems that they dismissed a child's pain as attention-seeking or weakness. It didn't matter if those adults were human parents in the slums of New Angeles or dragon emperors in crystal palaces. "Have you eaten today?" Marcus asked. Kiros shook his head weakly. "Food tastes like metal. Makes me sick." Marcus pulled out his personal water bottle and offered it to the prince. "Just small sips," he said. "Sometimes when my sister was sick, staying hydrated helped." As Kairos drank, Marcus noticed something the Zephyrian healers might have missed. The child's scales weren't just dulled. They had a subtle greenish tinge around the edges. Marcus had seen that color before, in the industrial districts back home. It was the sign of heavy metal poisoning. "Kairos, do you spend time in the lower levels, near the engine rooms or manufacturing areas?" The prince nodded. "I like to explore. The servants' passages go everywhere. But I'm not supposed to tell anyone." Marcus thought quickly. The Zephyrian palace was a marvel of engineering, but it was also ancient. Many of the lower levels had been built using older technology before they'd developed their current environmental safeguards. If a curious child had been exploring those areas regularly— "I need to get you help," Marcus said. "Real help." Kiros's eyes widened with fear. "No! If Father finds out I've been in the forbidden areas, he'll be even more angry." "He already thinks I'm a disappointment." Marcus reached out slowly and gently touched the child's shoulder. The scales felt warm and dry, another bad sign. "Listen to me, Kairos. You're not weak, and you're not a disappointment. You're sick, and I think I know what's causing it. But we need to get you treated before it gets worse." "The healers won't believe you," Kiros whispered. "You're just a human." The casual way the child said it wasn't meant to be cruel. It was simply stating a fact as he understood it. Humans were lesser beings, their opinions worthless when it came to important matters. But Marcus had dealt with prejudice before, and he wasn't about to let it stop him from helping a sick child. "Then we'll have to make them listen," he said with determination. Marcus helped Kiros to his feet, supporting the weak prince as they made their way out of the meditation chamber. The corridors of Platform 7 were quieter now, as most of the nobility had retired to their private quarters for the evening meal. Marcus knew the layout well from his cleaning duties, and he guided them toward the medical wing using the service passages. As they walked, Kairos grew weaker, leaning more heavily on Marcus. The human could feel the heat radiating from the child's body, definitely running a fever. Time was becoming critical. They reached the medical wing just as the evening shift was beginning. Marcus approached the reception desk, where a tall Zephyrian healer was reviewing patient charts on a holographic display. "Excuse me," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is Prince Kairos. He's very sick and needs immediate attention." The healer looked up with obvious annoyance, her serpentine features twisting into a frown when she saw Marcus's coveralls. "Human, you are not authorized to bring patients to this facility. If the prince requires medical attention, it should be arranged through proper channels." "He has metal poisoning," Marcus said firmly. "Look at his scales, the green discoloration around the edges. His breathing is labored, he has a fever, and he can't keep food down. These are classic symptoms." The healer's eyes flicked to Kairos, then back to Marcus with obvious skepticism. "Young human, you have no medical training. The prince has been examined by our finest healers. His condition is psychological, brought on by stress and insufficient dedication to his studies." Marcus felt his temper flare, but he forced himself to remain calm. "With respect, I think you're wrong, and if we wait to find out, it might be too late." At that moment, Kiros collapsed. Marcus caught him as he fell, feeling the prince's body go limp in his arms. The child's breathing had become even more shallow, and his skin felt burning hot. "Now will you help him?" Marcus demanded, lifting the unconscious prince toward the examination table. The healer finally seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation. She activated an emergency alert and called for a full medical team. Within minutes, the room was filled with Zephyrian doctors running scanners over Kairos's body. Marcus stood back as they worked, watching the readouts on their medical displays. He couldn't read the Zephyrian symbols, but he could see the doctors' expressions growing more concerned as the results came in. Finally, the lead physician turned to face the others. "Acute metal toxicity," she announced. "Specifically, thorium-based compounds. The levels are dangerously high." Marcus stepped forward. "I believe he's been exploring the old industrial sections of the lower platforms. The environmental safeguards there are outdated." The physician looked at him with surprise, as if she'd forgotten he was there. "How did you—" "That's exactly what our scans indicate. The exposure pattern suggests regular contact over several weeks." As the medical team began emergency treatment, word spread quickly through the palace. Within the hour, Emperor Draconis himself arrived at the medical wing, his massive form filling the doorway as he entered. The Dragon Emperor was intimidating even by Zephyrian standards, nearly 3 meters tall with scales that shifted color according to his mood. Right now, they were a deep crimson that spoke of barely controlled rage. "Explain," he commanded, his voice causing the crystal windows to vibrate. The lead physician bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, Prince Kairos has severe metal poisoning. Without immediate treatment, it could have been fatal. The human maintenance worker discovered him and brought him here." Emperor Draconis turned his massive golden eyes toward Marcus, who fought every instinct to run. "You," the Emperor said. "Approach." Marcus walked forward on unsteady legs until he was standing directly in front of the most powerful being in the galaxy. Up close, he could feel the mental pressure radiating from the Emperor, a psychic weight that seemed to press down on his thoughts. "You claim my healers were wrong about my son's condition?" the Emperor asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus swallowed hard. "Your Majesty, I think they were looking for the wrong thing. Prince Kairos told me he'd been exploring areas he wasn't supposed to visit. When I saw the symptoms, they reminded me of cases I'd seen back on Earth. And what makes you think a human would recognize something my trained physicians could not?" It was a trap. Marcus could feel it. Any answer that suggested human superiority would be seen as arrogance. But lying wouldn't help Kairos. "Because sometimes," Marcus said carefully, "an outside perspective can see things that familiarity might miss. On Earth, we've had to deal with industrial pollution for centuries. We know what those symptoms look like." The Emperor stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could feel the alien intelligence probing at the edges of his thoughts. Then, surprisingly, the massive dragon's expression softened slightly. "My son will recover?" he asked the physician. "Yes, Your Majesty. The treatment has begun, and his vital signs are already improving. In a few days, he should be completely healthy." Emperor Draconis nodded, then looked back at Marcus. "You will be rewarded for this service," he said. "Name what you desire." Marcus thought carefully. This was his chance to ask for anything: money, status, a better position. But as he looked at Prince Kairos lying unconscious on the medical table, only one thing seemed important. "I'd like permission to visit Kairos during his recovery," Marcus said, "if he wants the company." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "That is all? You could ask for wealth, for advancement, for a position of authority?" "Your Majesty," Marcus replied, "I just want to make sure he's okay." For the first time, Emperor Draconis smiled, a strange sight on his draconic features. "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully, "there is more to humans than we have given you credit for." As the medical team continued their work, Marcus found himself wondering if this incident might change something fundamental about how the Zephyrians viewed his species. But for now, he was content to simply watch Kairos's breathing grow stronger and know that he'd done the right thing. In the days that followed, as Prince Kairos recovered from his poisoning, something unprecedented began to happen in the Zephyrian Empire. Emperor Draconis ordered a complete review of how human perspectives might be incorporated into imperial decision-making. The incident had opened his eyes to the possibility that different experiences and backgrounds could provide valuable insights that even the most advanced Zephyrian minds might miss. Marcus continued his cleaning duties, but now he found himself occasionally consulted on matters relating to environmental safety and worker welfare. It was a small beginning, but it represented something that no one had expected, the first crack in the wall of assumed Zephyrian superiority. And in Prince Kairos's recovery room, a friendship was forming between a human maintenance worker and an imperial prince that would, in time, help bridge the gap between two very different species. 3 weeks after the poisoning incident, Marcus found himself in an entirely new situation. Instead of pushing a cleaning cart through empty corridors, he was sitting in a comfortable chair in Prince Kairos's private study, watching the young dragon work through his daily lessons with a private tutor. The prince had made a full recovery, his scales once again shimmering with the brilliant iridescence that marked healthy Zephyrian royalty. But more than his physical health had changed. During his recovery, Kairos had specifically requested that Marcus be allowed to visit him, and those visits had evolved into something unprecedented in the Empire's history, a genuine friendship between a human and Zephyrian nobility. "The quantum mathematics are still giving me trouble," Kairos said, looking up from his holographic display with frustration. His tutor, an elderly Zephyrian named Scholar Varix, had stepped out for a moment, leaving the prince to struggle with advanced calculations that would challenge university students on Earth. Marcus leaned forward to look at the problem. His engineering background from before he'd taken the maintenance job helped him understand what Kairos was trying to solve. "Try thinking about it differently," he suggested. "Instead of seeing the particles as separate entities, imagine them as part of a larger pattern. Like, have you ever watched a flock of birds move together?" Kairos tilted his head. A gesture Marcus had learned indicated curiosity. "Birds? The small flying creatures from your home world?" "Right. Each bird is individual, but they move as one unit. The flock has behaviors that no single bird possesses. Quantum particles can be like that, connected in ways that don't make sense if you only look at them separately." The prince's eyes brightened with understanding. He turned back to his calculations and began approaching the problem from this new angle. Within minutes, he'd solved what had been puzzling him for days. "Remarkable," came a voice from the doorway. Scholar Varix had returned and was observing them with interest. "Young human, you have just demonstrated a teaching method that our finest educators have overlooked." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the attention. "I just explained it the way my sister's flight instructor taught her about formation flying. Sometimes a simple analogy helps more than complex theory." Scholar Varix entered the room fully, his ancient eyes studying Marcus with new interest. "Tell me, Marcus Chen, what is your educational background?" "I have an engineering degree from Luna Technical Institute," Marcus replied, "specialized in environmental systems." "Luna Technical Institute," Varix repeated thoughtfully. "I am not familiar with this institution. What level of education does it represent in human society?" Marcus wasn't sure how to answer that. Lunatech was a good school, but nothing special by human standards. "It's adequate, solid technical training, but not prestigious." Scholar Varix exchanged a look with Prince Kairos that seemed to carry meaning Marcus couldn't interpret. "Prince Kairos, perhaps you could show our friend the calculation you completed yesterday? The one about stellar formation dynamics?" Kairos nodded and called up another holographic display. The mathematics that appeared made Marcus's head spin, equations that seemed to bend and twist through dimensions he couldn't even visualize. "This is standard curriculum for a Zephyrian prince," Kairos explained matter-of-factly. I need to understand stellar engineering principles if I'm to help govern worlds. Marcus stared at the display in shock. The calculations were beyond anything he'd encountered even in advanced graduate courses. How old are you again? By your calendar, approximately 12 years, Kairos replied. Why do you ask? On Earth, these equations wouldn't be taught until university level, advanced university level. Scholar Varix made a note on his personal tablet. Interesting. Prince Kairos. This human considers your current studies to be quite advanced by the standards of his species. But Marcus helped me understand the quantum problem faster than I've understood anything in weeks, Kairos protested. How can his education be inferior if he teaches better than our scholars? It was a question that had no easy answer, and Marcus could see it was troubling the young prince. The foundation of Zephyrian society was built on the belief that their mental capabilities far exceeded those of other species. But here was evidence that different didn't necessarily mean inferior. Before anyone could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the palace. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with urgency, and Scholar Varix immediately activated a communication device. Report, he commanded. The voice that responded was tight with panic. Scholar, we have an emergency. The orbital manufacturing station above Platform 12 is experiencing cascade failures. The quantum containment systems are destabilizing. Marcus felt his blood run cold. He knew exactly what that meant. How many people work on that station? He asked. Approximately 8,000, Scholar Varix replied, his face pale. If the containment fails completely, the explosion could destroy several platforms. Through the large window of Kairos's study, they could see the manufacturing station in the distance, a massive structure suspended in orbit around the main palace complex. Even from this distance, they could see emergency lights flashing along its hull. What's being done? Marcus asked. Our finest engineers are working on the problem, Scholar Varix said. The Emperor has mobilized every resource. Marcus watched the distant station and felt a familiar itch in his mind. The same feeling he'd had when he'd found Kairos sick in the meditation chamber. Something about the way the emergency lights were pulsing reminded him of a similar incident he'd read about in his environmental systems classes. Can I see the technical readouts? He asked suddenly. Scholar Varix looked at him with surprise. Young human, this is far beyond— Please, Marcus interrupted. I might be able to help. Kairos immediately activated his study's main display system. Show us the station schematics, he commanded. His royal access codes overrode any protests Scholar Varix might have made. The holographic display filled with complex diagrams showing the orbital station's structure. Marcus studied the quantum containment systems, following the power flow patterns and cooling systems. It was incredibly advanced technology, far beyond anything humans had developed. But the principles were familiar. There, Marcus said, pointing to a section of the diagram. The cooling system has a bottleneck. Look at the thermal exchange rates in Section 7. Scholar Varix examined the data. The temperatures are within acceptable parameters, he said. For now, Marcus replied. But look at the trend. The system is designed to handle peak loads, but only if the heat distribution is perfectly balanced. When you have a cascade failure like this, the load becomes uneven. The cooling system can't compensate fast enough. The Zephyrian engineers surely understand their own technology better than— Scholar Varix began. They understand their technology perfectly, Marcus interrupted. But sometimes being too close to something makes you miss the obvious. This is the same problem that destroyed a fusion plant on Europa 15 years ago. Different technology, same basic principle. Prince Kairos was studying the schematics intently. What would you do, Marcus? Temporarily shut down sections 4 through 8 to reduce the overall thermal load, Marcus said without hesitation. It'll cut the station's output by 60%, but it'll give the cooling system time to stabilize. That solution was already considered and rejected, Scholar Varick said. The economic impact would be enormous. The economic impact of the station exploding would be worse, Marcus pointed out. Through the communication system, they could hear frantic voices reporting worsening conditions. The containment fields were fluctuating more severely, and evacuation procedures were being implemented. Prince Kairos made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He activated the emergency communication system in his study, a direct line to the Emperor. "Father," he said when the connection opened, "I need to speak with you immediately about the orbital station crisis." Emperor Draconis appeared on the display, his massive form visible in what was clearly the main command center. Behind him, dozens of Zephyrian engineers were working frantically at control stations. "Kairos, this is not the time," the Emperor began. "Father Marcus has a solution, the human I told you about." The Emperor's expression shifted to confusion and then annoyance. "Son, our finest engineers are working on this problem. A human maintenance worker cannot possibly—" "With respect, Your Majesty," Marcus said, stepping into view of the communication system, "I think the solution is simpler than your engineers are making it." The command center fell silent. Through the display, Marcus could see dozens of Zephyrian faces turning toward the screen, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outrage. "Explain," the Emperor commanded. Marcus quickly outlined his analysis of the thermal distribution problem and his suggested solution. As he spoke, he could see the Zephyrian engineers pulling up the same data and running their own calculations. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then the chief engineer, a female Zephyrian with intricate patterns of scales that marked her as a master technician, spoke up. "The human is correct," she said quietly. "We were so focused on maintaining full operational capacity that we overlooked the thermal redistribution option. The mathematics confirm his analysis." Emperor Draconis stared at the screen for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then he turned to his engineers. "Implement the human solution, immediately." The next hour was tense as they watched the orbital station's status reports. Slowly, section by section, the manufacturing areas were powered down. The thermal load decreased, and the cooling systems began to stabilize. The cascade failure was halted, and the quantum containment fields returned to normal parameters. 8,000 lives had been saved by a maintenance worker who saw what the Empire's finest engineers had missed. In the aftermath, as the crisis passed and the command center celebrated, Emperor Draconis requested a private communication with his son and Marcus. "How?" he asked simply. "Sometimes experience with different problems gives you a different perspective," Marcus said. "Humans have made a lot of mistakes with industrial accidents. We've learned to recognize certain patterns." "The Europa fusion plant you mentioned," the Emperor said. "Tell me about that incident." Marcus explained the disaster that had killed 300 people and contaminated an entire moon's surface. It was one of the worst industrial accidents in human history, but the investigation that followed had led to new safety protocols and a better understanding of thermal management in high-energy systems. "So from your species' failures, wisdom was gained," the Emperor mused. "And that wisdom proved valuable even for our advanced technology." "Father," Prince Kiros said quietly, "I think we may have been wrong about humans." Emperor Draconis looked at his son thoughtfully. "Perhaps we have been wrong about many things, my son. Scholar Varick, I want you to prepare a full report on this incident. Include recommendations for how we might better utilize the perspectives of other species in our engineering and administrative processes." "It will be done, Your Majesty," Scholar Varick replied. After the Emperor signed off, the study fell into contemplative silence. Finally, Prince Kiros spoke. "Marcus, I want to ask you something. When you first helped me, you didn't know I was a prince, did you?" "No," Marcus admitted. "You were just a sick kid who needed help. And today, when you suggested the solution for the orbital station, you weren't trying to prove anything about humans being superior to Zephyrians?" "Of course not. I was just trying to help prevent a disaster." Prince Kairos nodded slowly. "I think that's what Father meant when he said there might be more to humans than we've given you credit for. You help because it's the right thing to do, not because of what you might gain from it." Scholar Varix made another note on his tablet. "Prince Kairos, that observation shows wisdom beyond your years. Perhaps this human has taught us both something valuable about the nature of true service." As the day wound down, Marcus found himself thinking about how much his life had changed in just 3 weeks. He'd gone from being invisible background staff to someone whose opinions were valued by imperial royalty. But more importantly, he'd gained a genuine friend in Prince Kairos, and perhaps helped start a change in how two species viewed each other. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since arriving in Zephyrian space, Marcus felt like he might be exactly where he was supposed to be. The galaxy was vast and full of different forms of intelligence, and perhaps it was time for everyone to learn from each other rather than assuming one species had all the answers. In the royal quarters that evening, Emperor Draconis stood before a massive window looking out at the orbital manufacturing station, now safely operational again. His mate, Empress Seraphina, joined him in contemplation. "A human saved 8,000 lives today," she observed. "What does this mean for our empire?" "It means," the Emperor replied slowly, "that we may need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about intelligence, wisdom, and the value of different perspectives. Our son has chosen his friends well." Outside, the stars shone with the same light they always had. But something fundamental had shifted in the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. Change was coming, carried forward by the unlikely friendship between a dragon prince and a human janitor who saw problems others missed and helped because it was simply the right thing to do. 6 months after the orbital station crisis, Marcus found himself in a position he never could have imagined. He stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Zephyrian Empire, wearing formal robes that marked him as an official advisor to the imperial court. Around him, representatives from dozens of species filled the massive chamber, all gathered for the first interspecies cooperation summit in the empire's 1,000-year history. The transformation had not happened overnight. In the months following Marcus's prevention of the orbital disaster, Emperor Draconis had quietly implemented a series of reforms that sent shockwaves through the established order of the galaxy. He had commissioned studies on the perspectives and capabilities of non-Zephyrian species, established exchange programs with other civilizations, and most controversially, created the position of cross-cultural advisor, a role Marcus now filled. Prince Kairos, now 13 and showing the first signs of the growth spurt that would eventually make him tower over Marcus, sat in the front row of the assembly. His friendship with the human had become a symbol of the new direction the empire was taking, though not everyone was pleased with these changes. "The proceedings will now come to order," announced Herald Zix, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics to reach every corner of the vast space. "His Imperial Majesty Emperor Draconis will address the assembly." The Emperor rose from his throne, a magnificent seat carved from a single piece of crystallized starlight. Even among Zephyrians, his presence was commanding, but months of working with Marcus had taught him to moderate his natural intimidation when dealing with other species. "Representatives of the galaxy," he began, his voice carrying the authority of countless worlds. "We gather today to discuss a new age of cooperation. For too long, our empire has believed that strength comes from dominance, that wisdom flows from a single source. Recent events have shown us the error of this thinking." A murmur rippled through the assembly. In the Zephyrian sections, some nobles shifted uncomfortably. The idea that their emperor was admitting error was almost unthinkable. 6 months ago, the emperor continued, my son lay dying, and my finest healers failed to recognize the cause. It took a human janitor to see what escaped our notice. 3 weeks later, a catastrophic failure threatened 8,000 lives. And again, it was human perspective that provided the solution our engineers missed. Marcus felt dozens of eyes turning toward him. He'd grown somewhat accustomed to the attention, but it still made him uncomfortable. He was here to represent humanity's contribution to the Empire, but he'd never forgotten that he was just one person, not some sort of superhuman genius. Today, Emperor Draconis announced, we propose the establishment of the Galactic Wisdom Council, an advisory body composed of representatives from every spacefaring species, working together to solve problems that no single civilization could address alone. The reaction was immediate and divided. The Zephyrian nobles looked shocked, while representatives from smaller species began talking excitedly among themselves. This was unprecedented. The most powerful empire in the galaxy was voluntarily sharing decision-making authority. A crystalline delegate from the Silicon Federation rose to speak. Their form resembled a living geometric sculpture, constantly shifting and reforming as they moved. Your Majesty, they said through their translation matrix, while we appreciate this gesture, many of us question whether this is simply a new form of Zephyrian control. How can we trust that our contributions will be valued equally? It was a fair question, and one that Marcus had helped the Emperor prepare for. Draconis gestured toward the human advisor. Marcus Chen will explain the proposed structure, the Emperor said. Marcus stood, still feeling surreal about addressing an assembly that included some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The council won't be controlled by any single species, he began. Each civilization will have equal representation, regardless of military or economic power. Decisions will be made by consensus, and no proposal can be implemented without approval from a majority of species representatives. A hegemony delegate, a crystalline being whose species had been conquered by the Zephyrians centuries earlier, spoke up. And if the Zephyrian Empire disagrees with a council decision, will you simply ignore it as you have ignored our requests for autonomy? The chamber fell silent. This was the heart of the matter, whether the Empire was truly willing to give up its absolute authority. Emperor Draconis stood again. Delegate Prism 9. Your species has served the Empire faithfully for 300 years. As a demonstration of our commitment to this new path, I hereby grant the crystalline hegemony full autonomy. You are free to govern yourselves as you see fit, with the Empire's friendship rather than its dominance. The shock that rippled through the assembly was palpable. The crystalline delegates stood frozen for a moment, their geometric form flickering as if unable to process what they'd heard. You're granting us freedom? Prism 9 finally managed. I am acknowledging what should have been recognized long ago, the Emperor replied. Your people's contributions to art, philosophy, and mathematics have enriched our entire galaxy. You deserve the right to chart your own destiny. As Prism 9 sat down in stunned silence, other delegates began to realize that this summit wasn't just political theater. Real change was happening. Prince Kairos rose from his seat, having been granted permission to address the assembly as part of his education in diplomacy. If I may speak, he said, his young voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I'd like to tell you how I learned to see differently. He told the story of his poisoning, but focused on something most of the delegates hadn't heard before, how Marcus had treated him not as royalty or as an alien, but simply as a sick child who needed help. Marcus didn't help me because he wanted rewards or recognition, Kairos said. He helped because it was the right thing to do. And when he saved the orbital station, it wasn't to prove human superiority. It was because people were in danger, and he had knowledge that could help them. The prince looked around the assembly, making eye contact with delegates from various species. That's what this council should be about. Not competition between our civilizations, but cooperation. Each of us sees the universe differently, and that's our strength, not our weakness. As Kiros sat down, Marcus felt a surge of pride for his young friend. The prince had grown tremendously in the past months, developing a wisdom that went far beyond his years. The debate continued for hours, with species after species voicing their concerns and suggestions. Marcus found himself called upon repeatedly to clarify details of the proposal, and he was struck by how many different perspectives emerged. The aquatic depths dwellers worried about water-world representation. The energy beings called Chorus were concerned about how non-physical entities would participate. The insectoid hive queens questioned whether collective consciousness species would be treated fairly. Each concern was noted and addressed, with the proposed structure evolving in real time to accommodate the diverse needs of the galaxy's inhabitants. Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, the birth of true galactic democracy. As the day wore on, a consensus began to emerge. Species after species voiced their support for the Wisdom Council, with amendments and modifications that made it stronger and more inclusive. Finally, as the Triple Suns set over the Zephyrian capital, Herald Zix called for a formal vote. All those in favor of establishing the Galactic Wisdom Council as outlined in today's discussions? The response was overwhelming. Of the 67 species represented, 63 voted in favor. Only 4 abstained, and none voted against. Emperor Draconis stood for the final time. Then let it be recorded that on this day, the Zephyrian Empire has chosen cooperation over domination, wisdom over power. The Galactic Wisdom Council is hereby established, with its first formal session to be held here in 3 months' time. As the delegates began to file out, many stopped to speak with Marcus. The crystalline, who had questioned the Empire's motives, approached him directly. "Human Marcus," Prism 9 said, "I must admit I was skeptical of your Emperor's intentions. But today has shown me that sometimes transformation comes from the most unexpected sources." "Change usually starts small," Marcus replied. "One person helping another, one new perspective being heard. It grows from there." After the last delegate had departed, Marcus found himself alone in the assembly hall with Prince Kairos and Emperor Draconis. The massive space felt different now, not like the seat of imperial power, but like the birthplace of something new. "Do you think it will work?" Kairos asked. "The council, I mean. Can all these different species really cooperate?" "It won't be easy," Marcus admitted. "There will be disagreements, conflicts, failures, but I think the attempt itself is worthwhile. Your father is right. No single civilization has all the answers." Emperor Draconis approached them, and Marcus was struck by how much the massive dragon had changed over the past months. The arrogance and casual dominance were gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Marcus Chen," the Emperor said formally, "when you first helped my son, you said you wanted nothing more than to visit him during his recovery. Now I ask you again, what do you want?" Marcus thought about it seriously. He had wealth now, status, influence beyond anything he'd dreamed of back on Earth. But looking at his friend Kairos, and thinking about the galaxy they were all trying to build together, only one answer felt right. "I want to help," he said simply. "Whatever comes next, however hard it gets, I want to help make it work." Emperor Draconis smiled, something that would have been unimaginable when Marcus first arrived at the palace. "Then you shall have what you desire, but I suspect the help will flow in both directions." As they walked out of the assembly hall together, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. A sick child, a maintenance worker's compassion, and the willingness to see past species barriers had somehow sparked a transformation that would reshape the entire galaxy. The challenges ahead were enormous. Implementing the Wisdom Council would require navigating complex politics, ancient prejudices, and competing interests across dozens of civilizations. There would be setbacks, failures, and times when the whole project seemed impossible. But as Prince Kiros chatted excitedly about the delegates he'd met and the ideas they'd shared, Marcus felt optimistic about the future. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and finally, its inhabitants were going to start working together to explore them. 3 months later, the first session of the Galactic Wisdom Council convened. Their first major decision was unanimous: to establish emergency response protocols that would prevent the kind of industrial disasters that had once threatened the orbital manufacturing station. Each species contributed their own hard-won knowledge of safety procedures, creating a comprehensive system that would protect workers across the galaxy. It was a small beginning, but like most meaningful change, it started with the simple recognition that everyone had something valuable to contribute. The janitor who had once pushed a cleaning cart through empty corridors now sat at a table with the most powerful beings in the galaxy, helping to solve problems that affected billions of lives. And in the royal quarters of the Zephyrian Palace, a young prince continued his studies, but now his lessons included perspectives from every corner of the galaxy. Prince Kiros was being prepared not just to rule an empire, but to help lead a community of worlds working together toward a better future. The stars still shone with the same ancient light, but the galaxy beneath them had become something new, a place where wisdom could come from anywhere, where help was offered freely across species lines, and where the simple act of caring about others could spark changes that reached across worlds. Marcus Chen had wanted nothing more than to make sure a sick child was okay. In doing so, he had helped heal more than just Prince Kairos. He had helped heal the divisions that had kept the galaxy's civilizations apart for millennia. It was, he reflected, a pretty good day's work for a janitor.